Welcome to the One in the Many. My name is Arshak Ben-Lian. My purpose with the One in the Many podcast is to explore the process of integration as developmentally formative and therapeutically corrective factor in human psychology. The One in the Many is the study of how conscious life differentiates identity, integrates relation, regulates itself under constraint, and sustains direction through time. Subscribe to the One in the Many podcast and connect with me by writing to abenlian@oneinthemany.net. Seeing yourself, you lose the world. Seeing the world, you find yourself. To know yourself is to see the world. This paradox is not poetic ornament, but philosophical orientation. It captures the fundamental reciprocity at the core of both philosophy and psychology. The self and the world are not opposed domains, but mutually determining poles of a single process of understanding. When one attempts to isolate the self completely from the world, one encounters emptiness. When one dissolves the self into the world without reflection, one loses the standpoint from which meaning arises. Knowledge, therefore, develops not from choosing one pole against the other, but from integrating both into a unified structure of comprehension. Philosophy begins from the recognition that reality exists independent of our wishes, fears, or preferences. Psychology begins from the recognition that reality becomes meaningful only as it is apprehended, interpreted, and integrated by a conscious agent. The first asks what it is. The second asks, what is it known, experienced, and acted upon? Their unity lies in the process through which existence becomes intelligible and the self becomes actualized. To know the world is to discover the structure within which the self must operate. To know the self is to discover the faculty by which the world becomes ordered into meaning. The movement between world and self unfolds through a cycle of cognition, observation, differentiation, induction, integration, and reduction. Observation establishes contact with reality. Differentiation distinguishes one element from another, allowing perception to acquire structure. Induction extracts pattern from differentiated particulars, enabling the mind to move beyond immediate experience toward abstraction. Integration relates abstractions into a coherent conceptual network. Reduction then returns these integrations to application, directing action within the world and testing the validity of understanding. The result of this cycle is identification, the stabilization of meaning within the unity of knowledge and experience. Each completed cycle becomes the foundation for the next, generating increasingly dense structures of comprehension. For many individuals, this process is energized through volition. Volition directs attention and regulates the sequence through which knowledge becomes actionable. Identification establishes what is present. Relationship clarifies how elements interact. Constraint reveals the boundaries within which action is possible. Direction selects a path within those boundaries. The mind does not operate in a vacuum, but in a structured field of possibility. And volition functions as the organizing force that selects among alternatives according to perceived relevance and value. What appears as freedom of choice is in fact structured responsiveness to reality as understood through prior integrations. Aristotle's doctrine of the four causes provides a profound framework for understanding how existence becomes intelligible and why consciousness becomes motivated to act. The material cause refers to the substrate from which something arises. Psychologically, this corresponds to appetite, the recognition of need that initiates orientation toward the world. The formal cause refers to the structure that organizes matter into intelligible pattern. Psychologically, this corresponds to vulnerability, the openness through which structure is sought in order to stabilize existence. The efficient cause refers to the mechanism by which change occurs. Psychologically, this corresponds to fragility, the recognition that effort must be exerted to preserve order against entropy. The final cause refers to the end toward which a process is directed. Psychologically, this corresponds to uncertainty, the forward orientation of consciousness toward what is not yet fully known, but must be discovered in order for action to be meaningful. Thus, existential conditions generate motivational energies. Appetite draws attention toward what sustains life. Vulnerability motivates the search for protective order. Fragility mobilizes work and adaptation. Uncertainty directs inquiry toward future integration. The four causes are therefore not merely explanatory categories of objects, but dynamic conditions of conscious life. They describe why cognition moves, why attention persists, and why integration becomes necessary for survival and flourishing. Much of this process operates initially at an implicit level. The mind observes before it can articulate observation. It differentiates before it can name distinctions. It abstracts before it can explain principles. It integrates before it can formulate concepts explicitly. From implicit observation emerges explicit perception. From implicit differentiation emerges articulation. From implicit abstraction emerges induction. From implicit integration emerges conceptualization. Conscious thought does not create order ex nihilo. It renders explicit the structure already forming through subconscious processing. Over time, repeated cycles of integration reduce the energetic cost of cognition, allowing knowledge to become increasingly proceduralized. What once required effort becomes fluid. What once required explicit recall becomes generative capacity. The loop returns continuously to the conditions described by the four causes. The world presents material constraints. Consciousness seeks formal coherence. Action applies efficient mechanisms. Purpose directs final orientation. Philosophically, the world matters because existence provides the structure within which knowledge must conform. Psychologically, the self matters because only through the activity of consciousness can existence become meaningful. The unity of philosophy and psychology therefore rests on the recognition that identity persists across transformation. The same reality that conditions knowledge also conditions the knower. The world becomes intelligible as the self becomes integrated. The self becomes actual as the world becomes understood. Observation leads to differentiation, differentiation to induction, induction to integration, integration to action, and action to renewed observation. Through this recursive movement, the individual does not merely accumulate information, but forms an ordered structure of meaning capable of guiding life. To see the world clearly is to discover the conditions of one's own development. To see oneself clearly is to recognize the structure through which the world becomes knowable. In this reciprocal genesis, philosophy reveals why reality matters, and psychology reveals why the self matters. Integration reveals why both are inseparable. Every systematic discipline reaches a point at which the proliferation of concepts must be brought back to first principles. Without such grounding, complexity becomes accumulation rather than integration. The development of the one in the many has now generated multiple tetradic structures across metaphysics, epistemology, psychology, development, and ethics. Their convergence indicates not conceptual redundancy, but structural unity. The recurrence of tetradic form suggests the presence of an underlying generative grammar governing the organization of knowledge and the development of the self. The minimal foundational structure of the one in the many can therefore be stated as four independent principles: identity, relation, constraint, and direction. These four are not arbitrary categories. They are necessary conditions for the persistence and development of any integrative system, whether biological, psychological, epistemological, or cultural. Let's take them one by one. Identity. Whatever exists is something definite. Existence presents itself as distinguishable units. To perceive is to differentiate. To know is to identify. Without identity, no object can be discriminated from its background. No concept can be formed, and no value can be pursued. Identity provides the one within the many. It is the basis of differentiation, the condition of recognition, and the starting point of all knowledge. In psychological terms, identity corresponds to the formation of stable units of awareness. In developmental terms, identity corresponds to the gradual differentiation of self from environment. In epistemological terms, identity corresponds to the recognition that existence is structured and intelligible. Identity, therefore, grounds the possibility of integration. Relation. What exists can enter into real relations with other existence under definite conditions. Multiplicity alone does not generate knowledge. Units must be capable of relation. Relation gives rise to structure, pattern, hierarchy, and meaning. To integrate is to relate without contradiction. Relation allows isolated perceptions to become concepts, isolated concepts to become systems, and isolated individuals to become communities. Relation is not arbitrary association, but structured connection governed by the nature of the relata. Integration is therefore the process by which relations are discovered, validated, and stabilized into coherent structures of knowledge and action. Without relation, identity remains inert. With relation, identity becomes intelligible. Constraint. All relation and development occur under conditions of limitation, regulation, and context. Constraint gives structure its discipline. It includes logic, balance, vulnerability, fragility, uncertainty, and contextual limitation. Constraint is not merely restriction, it is the condition that allows structure to maintain coherence across time. Logic constrains thought to non-contradiction. Biology constrains life to metabolic limits. Psychology constrains action through vulnerability and uncertainty. Context constrains meaning by specifying the conditions under which relations hold. Constraint is therefore the principle that distinguishes integration from misintegration. It prevents arbitrary combination and ensures that relations correspond to reality. Without constraint, relation dissolves into incoherence. And finally, 4, direction. Living beings sustain themselves by organizing relations toward continued integration through time. Direction introduces temporality and purpose. Integration is not a static state, but an ongoing process. Living beings must continually reorganize their relations in response to changing conditions. Direction expresses the tendency toward increasing coherence, stability, and generative capacity. In development, direction appears as maturation. In cognition, it appears as understanding. In ethics, it appears as purpose. In culture, it appears as progress. Direction does not impose an external end, but expresses the internal requirement of any system that must maintain itself through adaptive integration. Without direction, constraint becomes rigidity and relation becomes repetition. These 4 conditions are enacted through a recurrent epistemic cycle: observation, induction, integration, reduction. Observation differentiates identity. Induction discovers relations. Integration organizes relations into coherence. Reduction applies coherence to particular contexts. Reduction here does not imply diminishment, but specification, the return of integrated structure into the concreteness of action. Through repeated cycles, the density of integration increases. Knowledge becomes more stable, action more precise, and identity more differentiated yet unified. From this minimal structure emerge the various tetratic formulations previously identified. Aristotle's 4 causes: material, identity; formal, relation; efficient, constraint as operative conditions; final, direction. The 4 fundamentals of psychology: consciousness as identity apprehended, energy as capacity for relation and change, balance as constraint regulation, time as direction across change. In the 4 lessons of life, appetite functions as directional impulse, vulnerability, relational openness, fragility, constraint through susceptibility to disorder, uncertainty, epistemic limitation across time. In the 4 conditions of the one in the many, differentiation is the identity formation. Integration is the relation formation, and logic is the constraint validation. Context is the directionality, bounded scope of meaning. In the 4 developmental stages, childhood is the identity acquisition. Adolescence is the relational experimentation. Adulthood is the constrained stabilization. Mature adulthood is the directional recursion of integration. Because integration is neither automatic nor guaranteed, each tetradic structure may exist in one of 4 states: disintegration, integration, misintegration, or under-integration. These describe not additional axioms, but conditions of success or failure in the application of the axiomatic structure. Integration represents coherence across identity, relation, constraint, and direction. Disintegration reflects breakdown of relation. Misintegration reflects false relation. Under-integration reflects insufficient differentiation. The development of the self can therefore be understood as progressive stabilization of integration across context and time. The one, the many may therefore be expressed in minimal form. A conscious living being develops by differentiating identities, integrating relations, regulating them under contextual constraints, and directing them toward continued coherence through time. The recurrence of tetradic structure across domains suggests that integration is not merely a psychological preference, but a structural condition of intelligibility itself. Whatever identity can be differentiated, relation can be integrated. Whatever relations are constrained by logic and context, development through time becomes possible. The one in the many is therefore not merely a metaphysical statement, but a description of the generative structure through which knowledge, selfhood, and culture become possible. Integration is the process by which the many become one without ceasing to be many. This is the one in the many. The principle of life is the process of integration from a single cell to an ideal human being. The story of life unfolds through integration, from a single percept to a library of knowledge. Through virtue, reason, honesty, independence, selfishness, productivity, you set your values, purpose, to achieve self-esteem and happiness. Through time and energy, from induction to integration to reduction, the smallest particle unifies matter, and the highest purpose unifies your life. You, the one in the many, matter. May you integrate your life with value-driven days.